bound by the Bloodmoon. Vesper Whitmore had spent her life hiding from what she was. The villagers of Black Hollow had called her cursed, had whispered about the night she was born beneath an eclipsed moon. She had ignored them until the mark appeared, a burning sigil curling along her ribs, searing like fire beneath her skin. That night, the wolves came. That night, she met him. A man with golden eyes and a gaze that saw straight through her. "You were meant to be mine," he murmured, tilting his head as if listening to something distant. "And now, I've come to claim you." Chapter 1. The Eclipse and the Omen. The air hung thick and heavy, pregnant with the unnatural stillness that precedes a celestial event. Vesper Whitmore, at the tender age of 5, stood on the windswept moor, her small hand swallowed by the calloused grip of her grandmother, Alara. Above them, the sky was beginning its dramatic transformation. The sun, a familiar golden orb, was slowly being consumed by a creeping darkness, the moon's shadow inching across its fiery face. Alara, her face a roadmap of wrinkles etched by time and worry, squeezed Vesper's hand. "Look, child," she whispered, her voice raspy with age and a hint of something else, fear, perhaps. "The heavens weep for what is to come." Vesper, with the innocent curiosity of youth, tilted her head, her dark curls whipping around her face in the rising wind. "Why are they weeping, Nana?" The old woman didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the darkening sky. Her eyes, usually bright and full of life, now clouded with a premonition that sent a shiver down Vesper's spine, despite the warm summer air. The eclipse deepened, casting an eerie, twilight glow over the landscape. The sheep in the nearby fields bleated nervously, their calls echoing across the desolate moor. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of heather, and something else, something primal and unsettling, the faint, musky odor of wet fur. "They weep," Alara finally said, her voice barely audible above the wind, "because tonight the veil thins. Tonight, the wolves remember." Vesper, too young to understand the cryptic words, only knew that a strange unease had settled over her. She snuggled closer to her grandmother, seeking comfort in the familiar scent of lavender and wood smoke that clung to her woolen shawl. As the last sliver of sunlight disappeared, plunging the world into an unnatural darkness, a chorus of howls erupted from the distant forest. They were unlike any animal sounds Vesper had ever heard. They were deep, resonant, and filled with a mournful longing that seemed to claw at her very soul. Alara pulled Vesper closer, her grip tightening almost painfully. "Hush, child," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Don't look. Don't listen." But Vesper couldn't help but look. In the fleeting moments of total eclipse, she saw them. Silhouettes against the inky blackness, larger than any dogs she had ever seen, their eyes glowing with an unearthly, golden light. They moved with a fluid grace, their paws barely disturbing the ground as they loped across the moor, heading towards her. Vesper whimpered, burying her face in her grandmother's skirts. Alara began to chant, a low, guttural murmur in a language Vesper didn't recognize. The words seemed to vibrate in the air, pushing back against the encroaching darkness, against the chilling howls. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the eclipse ended. Light flooded back into the world, chasing away the shadows and the terrifying figures. The howls faded, replaced by the gentle bleating of sheep and the rustling of the wind through the heather. Alara let out a shaky breath, her body visibly relaxing. She looked down at Vesper, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. "It is done," she whispered, more to herself than to Vesper. "The omen has been cast." Vesper, still trembling, looked up at her grandmother. "What omen, Nana?" Alara didn't answer. She simply stroked Vesper's hair, her touch gentle but her expression grave. That night, as Vesper lay in her small bed in the attic room of their cottage, the memory of the golden eyes and the mournful howls haunted her dreams. She woke repeatedly, her heart pounding, her body covered in a cold sweat. The villagers of Black Hollow, a secluded hamlet nestled between the moors and the ancient Blackwood forest, had always been a superstitious lot. They whispered about old magic, about creatures that walked the night, about curses and omens. Vesper had always dismissed their tales as folklore, the ramblings of old women and fearful men. But after the eclipse, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that a shadow had fallen over her life. The years that followed were marked by a growing sense of isolation. The other children avoided her, their parents whispering warnings behind their hands. Vesper became a solitary figure, spending her days wandering the moors, reading ancient books in the dusty attic, and listening to her grandmother's increasingly cryptic pronouncements. Alara, sensing the growing darkness around her granddaughter, tried to prepare her. She taught her about herbs and healing, about the old ways, about the power that flowed through their bloodline. But she never spoke directly about the wolves, about the omen, about the fear that had haunted her since that fateful night. As Vesper blossomed into a young woman, her beauty became as striking as it was unsettling. Her dark hair cascaded down her back like a raven's wing. Her eyes, the color of deep sea, held a depth that seemed to draw people in, even as they instinctively recoiled. She possessed an ethereal quality, a sense of otherworldliness that set her apart from the mundane folk of Black Hollow. She felt it herself, this difference. A constant hum beneath her skin, a restless energy that yearned for something she couldn't name. She started noticing, for the past several full moons, that her body felt charged. The scent of the woods and a deep-rooted connection to the earth called to her. One evening, as Vesper sat by the fire, sketching in her worn leather-bound journal, Alara looked at her with a mixture of love and sorrow. "You are nearing your 25th year, Vesper," she said softly. "The time is coming." Vesper looked up, her pencil hovering over the page. "What time, Nana?" Alara hesitated, her gaze flickering to the window, where the full moon was just beginning to rise, casting a silvery glow over the landscape. "The time when the wolves will return." A chill ran down Vesper's spine. The memory of that night, the eclipse, the golden eyes, flooded back with a visceral intensity. She had tried to forget, to convince herself it had been a childish dream, a figment of her imagination. But deep down, she knew. She knew that something was coming, something inevitable and terrifying. Alara reached out and took Vesper's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You must be strong, child," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "You must be prepared." Prepared for what? Vesper wanted to ask, but the words caught in her throat. The fear, long suppressed, was rising again, choking her, silencing her. She looked into her grandmother's eyes, searching for answers, for reassurance. But all she saw was a reflection of her own fear, magnified and intensified by the weight of generations of secrets. The moon climbed higher, bathing the room in its cold, ethereal light. And in the distance, a single, mournful howl echoed through the night. It felt closer than ever before. Chapter 2. Whispers in Black Hollow. The howl, a lonely, desolate sound, lingered in the air long after it had faded into silence. Vesper shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls of the cottage. Alara remained silent, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames, lost in a world of memories and premonitions. Vesper, unable to bear the silence any longer, finally spoke. "Nana," she began, her voice hesitant, "what did you mean about the wolves returning?" Alara sighed, a deep, weary sound. She turned to Vesper, her face etched with a sadness that went beyond the years she had lived. "It's a story, child," she said, "a story as old as Black Hollow itself. A story about power, about curses, and about a bond that cannot be broken." Vesper leaned forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard fragments of this story, whispered in hushed tones by the villagers, dismissed as old wives' tales. But now, hearing it from her grandmother, the words took on a new weight, a chilling reality. "They say," Alara continued, her voice low and steady, "that long ago, this land was ruled by wolves. Not ordinary wolves, but beings of immense power, capable of shifting between human and animal form. They were the guardians of the forest, the protectors of the balance between the human world and the wild. Vesper listened, captivated, her fear mingling with a strange sense of fascination. She had always felt a connection to the wild, a yearning for something beyond the confines of Black Hollow. But then, Elara said, her voice dropping to a whisper, came the betrayal. A human woman, driven by greed and ambition, broke a sacred pact with the wolves. She stole their power, their magic, and cursed them to remain trapped in their animal forms, forever bound to the moon. Vesper gasped. Curse them?
How?
With a sigil, Elara said, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern on the worn wooden table. A mark, burned into the flesh, that binds the wolf to the will of the one who holds the power. The image of a burning sigil flashed in Vesper's mind, a premonition of something yet to come. She instinctively touched her ribs, her fingers tracing the smooth skin beneath her dress. And the woman? Vesper asked, her voice barely a whisper. She became the first alpha, Elara said, the ruler of the wolves, wielding their power for her own ends. But the curse it came with a price. It twisted her, consumed her, and passed down through her bloodline, generation after generation. Vesper felt a cold dread creeping into her heart. She looked at her grandmother, her eyes wide with understanding. And we are descendants of that woman? Elara nodded slowly, her gaze heavy with the weight of their shared history. Yes, Vesper. We are the inheritors of her curse, of her power, and of her connection to the wolves. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Vesper felt a wave of dizziness, of disbelief, of a terrifying sense of inevitability. She was not just Vesper Whitmore, the outcast of Black Hollow. She was part of something ancient, something powerful, something dangerous. But why me? Vesper asked, her voice trembling. Why now? The eclipse, Elara said, her voice barely audible. It was a sign, a catalyst. It awakened the dormant power within you, the power that has been waiting for generations to be claimed. Vesper remembered the golden eyes, the mournful howls, the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. It all made sense now, in a horrifying, twisted way. She was the key, the vessel, the one who would fulfill the ancient prophecy. The villagers of Black Hollow, despite their fear and their whispers, had always sensed something different about Vesper. They saw it in her eyes, in her bearing, in the way she seemed to belong more to the wild than to their small, insular world. They called her Moonchild, Wolfsbane, and other, more sinister names. They avoided her, crossed themselves when she passed, and warned their children to stay away. Vesper had learned to ignore their whispers, to build a wall around her heart, to find solace in the solitude of the moors and the forest. But now, the whispers took on a new meaning, a chilling resonance. They were not just superstitious ramblings, they were echoes of a truth she was only now beginning to understand. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in Black Hollow grew. The full moon was approaching, and with it, a sense of impending doom. The villagers boarded up their windows, locked their doors, and kept their children indoors after dark. The air was thick with fear, with anticipation, with the unspoken knowledge that something was about to happen. Vesper, too, felt the change. Her senses were heightened, her body thrumming with a restless energy. She found herself drawn to the forest, to the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, to the scent of damp earth and pine needles. She felt a connection to the wild that she had never experienced before, a primal pull that both terrified and exhilarated her. One evening, as she walked along the edge of the forest, she heard a rustling in the undergrowth. She stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew, instinctively, that it was not a deer, or a fox, or any other ordinary animal. It was something else, something more. She stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, its fur the color of midnight, its eyes glowing with that same unearthly, golden light she remembered from her childhood. The wolf stood there, watching her, its gaze intense and unwavering. Vesper felt a wave of fear, but it was mixed with something else, a strange sense of recognition, of familiarity. She felt as if she had seen this wolf before, in her dreams, in her nightmares. The wolf took a step towards her, and Vesper instinctively recoiled. But then, something unexpected happened. The wolf lowered its head, its ears flattening against its skull. It whined softly, a sound that was both mournful and pleading. And, in that moment, Vesper knew. This was not just a wolf. This was the beginning of her destiny. The wolf let out another soft whine and stepped closer, so Vesper could feel its warm breath against her skin. Chapter 3. The Mark of the Wolf. The wolf's breath, warm and carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, ghosted over Vesper's skin. She stood frozen, not from fear, but from a strange, compelling stillness. The golden eyes, so intense in her childhood memory, held a depth of sadness, a weariness that resonated with a hidden part of her own soul. It wasn't the gaze of a predator, but of something lost. The wolf lowered its head further, nudging her hand gently with its wet nose. A tremor ran through Vesper, not of fear, but of a strange, unfamiliar connection. It was as if a dormant part of her was awakening, responding to the wolf's presence in a way she couldn't comprehend. The villagers' whispers, Alara's warnings, all faded into the background, replaced by an overwhelming sense of inevitability. Hesitantly, Vesper reached out a hand, her fingers trembling as she touched the wolf's thick fur. It was surprisingly soft, like velvet beneath her fingertips. The wolf stilled, its golden eyes closing for a moment, as if savoring the contact. Then, without warning, a sharp, burning pain erupted on Vesper's side, just beneath her ribs. She gasped, clutching at her dress, her fingers encountering a searing heat that seemed to radiate from within. She stumbled back, her eyes wide with shock and pain. The wolf whined, its ears flattening against its skull, its golden eyes filled with concern. Vesper pulled up the side of her dress, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage. There, on her pale skin, a mark was forming. It was a swirling, intricate pattern, like a stylized wolf's head, its lines glowing with a fiery, reddish-gold light. It was beautiful, terrifying, and undeniably magical. The Mark of the Wolf. Alara's words echoed in her mind, a sigil burned into the flesh that binds the wolf to the will of the one who holds the power. But this felt different. It felt less like a binding and more like a connection, a joining. The pain subsided, leaving behind a dull ache and a tingling warmth that spread throughout her body. Vesper stared at the mark, mesmerized by its intricate beauty and the power it seemed to emanate. It was a part of her now, an indelible brand that linked her to the wolves, to the ancient curse, to a destiny she was only beginning to understand. The wolf, sensing her shift in emotion, stepped closer again, its gaze questioning. Vesper looked up, meeting those golden eyes, and saw not a beast, but a reflection of something deep within herself. A wildness, a freedom, a power that had been dormant for too long. She didn't know what this mark meant, what it would demand of her, but she knew one thing. She was no longer just Vesper Whitmore, the outcast of Black Hollow. She was something more, something bound. As if in answer to her unspoken thoughts, the wolf let out a low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the ground and into Vesper's very bones. It was a call, a summons, a promise. Vesper, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, took a step towards the wolf. She didn't know where it would lead her, what trials she would face, but she knew she couldn't turn back. The mark had chosen her, the wolves had claimed her, and her destiny was now inextricably linked to theirs. The wolf turned and began to lope towards the forest, its movements fluid and graceful. Vesper hesitated for only a moment before following, her steps hesitant at first, then gaining confidence as she moved deeper into the shadows. The trees closed in around her, their branches intertwined overhead, creating a canopy of darkness that felt both protective and menacing. The scent of the forest intensified, filling her senses with the earthy aroma of decaying leaves, damp moss, and the sharp, clean scent of pine. The sounds of the night, the hooting of owls, The rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth seemed amplified, heightened, as if she were experiencing the world through new, more sensitive senses. She felt a strange sense of belonging, of coming home. This was the world she had always yearned for, the world that had called to her in her dreams, in her restless wanderings on the moors. The world of the wild, of magic, of the wolves. As she followed the wolf deeper into the forest, she noticed a faint glow ahead. It grew brighter as she approached, revealing a clearing bathed in the silvery light of the full moon. In the center of the clearing stood a figure, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. It was a man. He was tall and powerfully built, his shoulders broad, his stance radiating an aura of authority and danger. He was dressed in dark clothing that seemed to blend with the shadows, his long hair, the color of raven's wings, falling loose around his shoulders. Vesper stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She knew, instinctively, who this was. The Alpha. The one who had called the wolf to her. The one who held the power. The man turned, his gaze sweeping over her, and Vesper felt a jolt of energy pass through her, as if their connection had been solidified, amplified by his presence. His eyes, like the wolf's, glowed with that same unearthly, golden light. But his gaze held something more in intensity, a possessiveness, a knowledge that sent a shiver down her spine. He started walking towards her, and her heart pounded so loudly in her chest she could barely hear anything else. Chapter 4. Eyes of Golden Fire. He moved with a predatory grace, each step deliberate and controlled, like a wolf stalking its prey. Vesper found herself unable to move, rooted to the spot by a mixture of fear and an unsettling fascination. The air crackled with an energy she couldn't define, a palpable tension that tightened her muscles and made her breath catch in her throat. As he drew closer, the moonlight illuminated his features, revealing a face that was both strikingly handsome and deeply unsettling. High cheekbones, a strong jawline shadowed by a day's growth of beard, and a mouth that was set in a firm, unyielding line. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the same golden hue as the wolf's, burning with an inner fire that seemed to pierce through her defenses, seeing straight into her soul. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, taking in every detail: the wind-blown tangles of her dark hair, the wide, apprehensive eyes, the way she clutched at the fabric of her dress where the mark burned beneath. He seemed to be assessing her, weighing her, as if deciding what to do with this unexpected offering of fate. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. Vesper felt exposed, vulnerable, under his intense scrutiny. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, to break the spell that seemed to hold them both captive, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "Vesper Whitmore," he said, her name sounding like both an accusation and a promise. "The marked one." Vesper swallowed, her throat dry. Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. A faint smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that did little to soften the intensity of his gaze. "I am Reese," he said, "Alpha of the Blackwood Pack. And you are mine." The words, spoken with such quiet certainty, sent a shiver of both fear and excitement through Vesper. "Mine." The possessiveness in his tone was undeniable, a claim that resonated with the mark on her side, with the ancient curse that bound them together. "Mine?" Vesper repeated, her voice stronger now, fueled by a flicker of defiance. "I belong to no one." Reese raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his golden eyes. "The mark says otherwise," he said, his gaze dropping to her side, where the sigil pulsed with a faint, reddish gold light. "It is a bond, a connection that cannot be broken. You are bound to me, Vesper, as I am bound to you." Vesper instinctively touched her ribs, her fingers tracing the outline of the mark. She felt its power, its pull, and she knew, deep down, that he was right. She was bound to him, to this enigmatic, dangerous man, by a force she didn't understand. What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Reese took a step closer, his presence overwhelming, his scent a heady mix of wood smoke, pine, and something wilder, something undeniably animal filling her senses. "I want what is rightfully mine," he said, his voice low and husky. "The power that flows through your blood, the power that has been denied to us for generations." Vesper felt a surge of fear, but also a flicker of excitement. The power he spoke of, she felt it too, a dormant energy that had awakened within her, a wildness that yearned to be unleashed. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "What power?" Reese reached out a hand, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. Vesper flinched at the contact, but she didn't pull away. His touch was surprisingly gentle, sending a shiver of warmth through her. "The power of the old ones," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The power to heal, to control, to command. The power that your ancestors stole from us, the power that has been locked away, waiting for the right moment, the right vessel to be released." Vesper stared at him, her mind reeling. She was a vessel? A conduit for this ancient power? It was too much to comprehend, too much to believe. And yet, the mark on her side, the connection she felt to Reese, to the wolf, told her that it was true. "But why me?" she asked, her voice pleading for understanding. Reese's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of something that might have been compassion crossing his features. "Because you are the strongest," he said. "The most resilient. The one who can bear the burden of the curse, the one who can break it or wield it. Break it or wield it." The choice, it seemed, was hers. But what did it mean? What would be the consequences of either path? Vesper looked into his golden eyes, searching for answers, for guidance. But all she saw was a reflection of her own confusion, her own fear, and her own growing attraction. He was dangerous, she knew that. He was a creature of the wild, of the night, bound by an ancient curse and driven by a primal need for power. And yet, she couldn't deny the pull she felt towards him, the undeniable connection that resonated between them. It was a connection forged in darkness, in magic, in the shared legacy of a curse that had haunted their bloodlines for generations. A connection that was both terrifying and irresistible. The moonlight seemed to shift, bathing them both in a silver glow. Reese took another step closer, and now she could feel the heat coming off of him. Chapter 5. A pact sealed in moonlight. The heat radiating from Reese was more than just physical warmth, it was a palpable energy, a raw power that hummed in the air between them. Vesper felt it tingling on her skin, a subtle vibration that resonated with the mark on her side. It was both frightening and intoxicating, a dangerous allure that she found herself struggling to resist. He stood so close now that she could see the faint flecks of gold within the amber of his eyes, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the subtle rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. The scent of him, that intoxicating mix of wood smoke, pine, and untamed wildness, filled her senses, clouding her judgment, making it difficult to think clearly. "What happens now?" Vesper managed to ask, her voice a breathless whisper, her gaze locked on his. Reese's expression remained unreadable, his golden eyes holding hers captive. "Now," he said, his voice low and resonant, "we begin." "Begin what?" Vesper pressed, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, sending a shiver of awareness through her. "We reclaim what was lost," he said. "We break the curse that has bound my people for generations. And we explore the bond that fate has forged between us." The last sentence was spoken with a subtle shift in tone, a hint of something deeper, something more personal than just the shared burden of the curse. It was a suggestion of intimacy, of a connection that went beyond the magical, beyond the ancient pact that tied them together. Vesper felt a flush rise to her cheeks, a warmth that had nothing to do with the mark and everything to do with the proximity of this powerful, enigmatic man. She was drawn to him. She couldn't deny it, but she was also wary, afraid of the unknown, of the power he wielded, of the potential consequences of surrendering to this connection. I don't know if I can do this," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Reese's hand moved from her jaw to cup her cheek, his thumb gently stroking the skin beneath her eye. You are stronger than you know, Vesper, he said, his voice softening, his gaze holding a surprising tenderness. You have survived Black Hollow. You have endured the whispers, the fear, the isolation. You have the blood of the old ones flowing through your veins, the spirit of a survivor in your heart. You are not alone in this. His words, meant to reassure, had the opposite effect. They reminded her of her vulnerability, of the burden she now carried, of the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. But what if I fail? She asked, her voice laced with a quiet desperation. What if I can't control this power? What if I make things worse? Reese's grip on her cheek tightened slightly, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. You will not fail, he said, his voice firm, unwavering. I will not allow it. I will be there, by your side, guiding you, protecting you. We will do this together. The promise in his voice, the unwavering certainty, was both comforting and terrifying. It implied a level of commitment, of intimacy, that she wasn't sure she was ready for. But she also found herself strangely reassured by his confidence, by his willingness to share this burden with her. He lowered his head, his breath warm against her ear. Trust me, Vesper, he whispered. Trust in the bond, in the power that flows between us. Trust in me. The word trust hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge across a chasm of uncertainty. Could she trust him? Could she trust this wild, unpredictable man who claimed her as his, who held her destiny in his hands? She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, of manipulation. But all she saw was a raw, undeniable sincerity, a depth of emotion that mirrored her own conflicted feelings. And in that moment, something shifted within her. The fear didn't disappear entirely, but it was overshadowed by a growing sense of acceptance, of surrender. She was bound to him, to this destiny, to this power. There was no escaping it. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance, a glimmer of hope, that together they could overcome the darkness, break the curse, and forge a new future, not just for his people, but for themselves. Vesper took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. She met his gaze, her own eyes reflecting the moonlight, a newfound determination hardening her resolve. All right, she said, her voice steady, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. I trust you. The words, spoken softly but with conviction, sealed their pact. A visible wave of energy rippled outwards, originating between Vesper and Rhys. The moon above seemed to shine brighter, the wind whispered through the trees, and the mark on Vesper's side pulsed with a warm, vibrant light. It was a moment of profound significance, a turning point in both their lives. The ancient curse had been acknowledged, the bond accepted, and their journey had begun. A journey into the unknown, into the heart of darkness, into the depths of a love that was both forbidden and inevitable. Rhys smiled down at her, and for the first time, there was no darkness in it. Chapter 6. The Alpha's Claim. The smile that transformed Rhys's face was a revelation. Gone was the harsh, predatory intensity, replaced by a warmth that reached his golden eyes, softening their edges and revealing a vulnerability that Vesper hadn't glimpsed before. It was a glimpse behind the mask of the Alpha, a hint of the man beneath the burden of leadership and the weight of the ancient curse. He lowered his head, his forehead resting lightly against hers, his breath mingling with hers. Thank you, Vesper, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. You have given me hope and more. The more hung unspoken between them, a potent, unspoken acknowledgement of the attraction, the connection that had sparked from the moment they met. It was a connection that went beyond the magical bond, beyond the curse, a connection of souls that resonated with a power all its own. Vesper closed her eyes, savoring the closeness, the feeling of his breath on her skin, the warmth that radiated from him, banishing the chill of the night. She felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she had never experienced before, not even with Alara. It was a terrifying, exhilarating sensation, this feeling of being completely seen, completely accepted by this powerful, enigmatic man. He pulled back slightly, his golden eyes searching hers, as if seeking confirmation, reassurance. "This will not be easy, Vesper," he said, his voice regaining some of its former gravity. "There will be challenges, dangers, sacrifices. Are you ready for this?" Vesper met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a newfound determination. "I am," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "I'm not afraid." It wasn't entirely true. She was afraid of the unknown, of the power she now wielded, of the potential consequences of their actions. But she was also excited, invigorated by the challenge, by the prospect of breaking free from the shadows of her past and forging a new destiny. Rhys nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes.
"Good," he said.
"Then let us begin." He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, his grip strong and reassuring. The contact sent a jolt of energy through her, a tangible manifestation of their bond. He led her towards the edge of the clearing, towards a path that wound its way deeper into the forest. As they walked, Rhys began to explain the situation, the complexities of the curse, the challenges they faced. He spoke of his pack, of their struggles, of their longing for freedom, of their hope that Vesper, the marked one, could finally break the chains that had bound them for generations. "The curse," he explained, "limits our ability to shift. We are trapped in our wolf forms for most of the month, only able to assume human form during the 3 nights surrounding the full moon. It weakens us, makes us vulnerable to hunters, to those who would exploit our power." Vesper listened intently, absorbing every word, her mind racing with questions. "And the power that flows through my blood? What is it exactly?" "It is the power of the Old Ones," Rhys said, "the ancient magic that once flowed freely through this land. It is the power to heal, to control the elements, to command the creatures of the forest. Your ancestor, she stole a portion of that power, twisting it to her own ends, using it to bind us to her will. And I can use this power?" Vesper asked, a mixture of awe and trepidation in her voice. "Yes," Rhys said, "but it will take time, training, control. It is a dangerous power, Vesper, one that can easily corrupt, consume. You must learn to wield it wisely, to use it for good, not for personal gain." Vesper nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. She felt the power within her, a simmering energy that yearned to be released, but she also sensed the potential for darkness, for destruction. As they walked deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller, their branches intertwined overhead, blocking out most of the moonlight. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Vesper felt a growing sense of unease, a prickling of her skin that warned her of danger. She glanced at Rhys, but he seemed unconcerned, his senses alert, his body poised, ready for anything. Suddenly, he stopped, his hand tightening on hers. "We are not alone," he said, his voice low and warning. Vesper strained her ears, listening. At first, she heard nothing, but then, she caught at a faint rustling in the undergrowth, the snap of a twig, the subtle scent of something unfamiliar. Something hostile. Rhys pushed her behind him, his body shielding hers, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Hunters," he growled, his voice filled with a primal anger. "They have been tracking us." Vesper felt a surge of fear, but she also felt a surge of protectiveness. She didn't want to be a burden, a damsel in distress. She wanted to fight, to stand beside Rhys, to use the power that flowed through her veins. She stepped out from behind him, her chin lifted, her eyes narrowed. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I can help." Rhys looked at her, his golden eyes searching hers. He saw the determination, the courage, the flicker of power that sparked within her. He nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture of acceptance. "Then let us show them," he said, his voice a low growl, "what it means to face the alpha and his mate." The word, mate, vibrated with a deep resonance. This was the first time he had openly declared that she had a role to play, not by blood, but by bond. The declaration sent a new heat through her. Chapter 7. Running from Destiny. The word mate, spoken with such possessive weight, resonated through Vesper, sending a wave of complex emotions washing over her. Fear, excitement, a strange sense of inevitability, and a flicker of defiance. She wasn't ready for that label, for the implications of a bond that went beyond magic, beyond the curse. She was still Vesper Whitmore, struggling to understand her own identity, her own power, and now she was being claimed as something more. Before she could process her reaction, the hunters emerged from the shadows. There were 3 of them, clad in dark clothing, their faces grim, their eyes filled with a cold determination. They carried crossbows, the bolts tipped with silver, a known weakness of werewolves. Reese shifted, his body transforming with a speed and grace that took Vesper's breath away. One moment he was a man, the next a magnificent wolf, his fur the color of midnight, his eyes glowing with that same unearthly, golden light. He let out a low growl, a warning rumble that echoed through the forest. Vesper, despite her fear, felt a surge of awe. She had seen him as a wolf before, but this was different. This was the Alpha, in his full power, a creature of immense strength and primal beauty. She knew she had to do something to help, but she didn't know how. She felt the power within her, a tingling energy that surged through her veins, but she didn't know how to control it, how to direct it. One of the hunters raised his crossbow, aiming at Reese. Vesper reacted instinctively, stepping in front of the wolf, her arms outstretched, as if to shield him with her own body.
"No,"
she cried, her voice filled with a desperate plea. The hunter hesitated, his eyes flickering with surprise at her unexpected intervention. He lowered his crossbow slightly, his gaze shifting from Vesper to Reese, then back again. "Step aside, girl," he growled, his voice harsh and threatening. "This is not your fight. He's not yours to hunt," Vesper retorted, her voice trembling but firm. He's protected." The hunter scoffed. "Protected? By you? You're just a girl." Vesper felt a surge of anger, a spark of defiance that ignited the power within her. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to do something, anything to stop them. She focused her mind, her will, on the crossbow in the hunter's hand. She visualized the weapon shattering, breaking, rendering it useless. She felt a strange tingling sensation in her fingertips, a surge of energy that flowed from her body towards the hunter. The crossbow, as if struck by an invisible force, splintered in the hunter's hand, the wood cracking, the metal twisting. The hunter cried out in surprise, dropping the broken weapon, his eyes wide with disbelief. The other 2 hunters stared at Vesper, their expressions a mixture of shock and fear. They had never seen anything like this before. This was not the work of an ordinary girl. This was magic. Reese, in his wolf form, let out a triumphant howl, a sound that echoed through the forest, a challenge to the hunters, a declaration of his power. The hunters, realizing they were outmatched, hesitated for a moment, then turned and fled, disappearing into the shadows. Vesper stood there, trembling, her body drained of energy, her mind reeling from what she had just done. She had used the power, the ancient magic that flowed through her blood, and it had worked. She had saved Reese. The wolf shifted back into his human form, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and something else. Something that looked like pride. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, his grip strong and reassuring. "You did it, Vesper," he said, his voice filled with emotion.
"You saved me."
Vesper shook her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know how I did it," she confessed. "It just happened." Reese smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his golden eyes. "It's the power, Vesper," he said. "It's a part of you, a gift, a responsibility. And you wielded it beautifully." But Vesper couldn't shake the feeling of unease, of fear. She had tasted the power, and it was intoxicating, seductive. But it was also dangerous, unpredictable. What if she couldn't control it? What if it consumed her? She looked at Reese, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "I don't want this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want this power, this destiny. I just want to be normal." Reese's smile faded, his expression turning serious. "Normal is not an option, Vesper," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You are not normal. You are extraordinary. You are the marked one, the one who holds the key to our freedom. You cannot run from this, Vesper. You must embrace it." But Vesper couldn't embrace it. Not yet. The fear was too strong, the responsibility too overwhelming. She pulled her hand from his, her eyes filled with a sudden, desperate need to escape. I need to go," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to think." And before Reese could stop her, she turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the forest, leaving him alone, staring after her, his heart heavy with a mixture of disappointment and understanding. He knew this was a lot for her to take on, but he had hoped she would embrace her power. He sighed, and the night felt colder without her presence. Chapter 8. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. Vesper ran blindly through the forest, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away, to escape the weight of Reese's words, the burden of her destiny, the overwhelming reality of the power that surged within her. She stumbled over roots, branches snagged at her clothes, but she didn't stop. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs ached, until she could run no more. She collapsed at the base of a giant oak, its branches reaching up to the sky like skeletal fingers. She sat there, huddled against the rough bark of the tree, her body trembling, her mind racing. She was lost, alone, and terrified. She had run from Reese, from the pack, from the only people who could possibly understand what she was going through. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the images, the memories, the fear. But it was no use. The mark on her side pulsed with a warm, insistent energy, a constant reminder of the bond, of the curse, of the destiny she couldn't escape. She thought of Alara, of her grandmother's cryptic warnings, of the fear that had haunted her since that fateful night of the eclipse. She wished Alara were here, to guide her, to comfort her, to tell her what to do. But Alara was gone, and Vesper was alone. Alone with her power, with her fear, with the echoes of a forgotten past that were now shaping her future. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, she heard a faint sound, a rustling in the undergrowth. She tensed, her senses alert, expecting to see the hunters, or Reese, or another member of the pack. But it was none of those. It was an old woman, her face wrinkled and weathered, her eyes as bright and sharp as a hawk's. She wore a simple dress of homespun cloth, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and she carried a gnarled walking stick. Vesper stared at her, surprised. She had never seen this woman before, and yet there was something familiar about her, something that resonated with a deep, primal part of her being. The old woman smiled, a knowing, gentle smile that eased Vesper's fear. "Lost, child?" she asked, her voice raspy but kind. Vesper nodded, her voice caught in her throat. "It's all right," the old woman said. "I know the way." She held out her hand, and Vesper, without hesitation, took it. The woman's grip was surprisingly strong, her hand warm and comforting. The old woman led her through the forest, along a path that Vesper hadn't noticed before. They walked in silence, the only sound the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. As they walked, Vesper felt a strange sense of peace, of calm, settle over her. The fear and the confusion didn't disappear entirely, but they faded into the background, replaced by a quiet sense of acceptance. Finally, they reached a small clearing, bathed in the soft glow of the moon. In the center of the clearing stood a small, stone cottage, its walls covered in ivy, its windows glowing with a warm, inviting light. "This is where I live," the old woman said.
"Come in, child."
"You're safe here." Vesper followed her into the cottage. The interior was small but cozy, filled with the scent of herbs and wood smoke. A fire burned brightly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. There were shelves filled with books, jars of dried herbs, and other strange and fascinating objects. The old woman motioned for Vesper to sit by the fire. She poured her a cup of herbal tea, its aroma fragrant and soothing. Vesper took a sip, the warm liquid calming her nerves. She looked at the old woman, her eyes filled with questions. "Who are you?"
she asked.
The old woman smiled. "My name is Morwenna," she said. "And I am a friend." "A friend?" Vesper repeated, confused. "But I've never met you before." "Perhaps not in this life," Morwenna said, her eyes twinkling. "But our paths have crossed before, child. Many times." Vesper stared at her, trying to understand her cryptic words. What do you mean?" Morwenna reached out and took Vesper's hand, her fingers tracing the outline of the mark on her side. "You are marked, child," she said. "Marked by the old ones, by the power that flows through this land. You are a part of something ancient, something powerful, something destined." Vesper felt a shiver run down her spine. It was the same thing Reese had said, the same thing Alara had hinted at. But hearing it from this strange, wise old woman, it felt different, somehow. Less terrifying, more inevitable. "I know you're scared, child," Morwenna said, her voice gentle and understanding. "I know you're confused. But you are not alone. I am here to help you, to guide you, to teach you." "Teach me?" Vesper asked. "Teach me what?" "Teach you about your power," Morwenna said. "About the old ones, about the curse, about your destiny. Teach you how to control it, how to wield it, how to use it for good." Vesper looked at her, hope flickering in her heart. Perhaps this was the answer, the guidance she had been seeking. Perhaps this old woman, this Morwenna, could help her understand, help her accept, help her become what she was meant to be. Will you teach me?" Vesper asked, her voice barely a whisper. Morwenna smiled. "Of course, child," she said. "That is why I am here." And as the fire crackled in the hearth and the moon shone down on the small stone cottage, Vesper began her journey of discovery, a journey into the echoes of a forgotten past, a journey that would lead her to her true self, to her true power, to her true destiny. She felt safe for the first time in what felt like years. Chapter 9. The Hunter's Snare. The sense of safety Vesper felt in Morwenna's cottage was a fragile illusion, a temporary reprieve from the dangers that lurked outside. While she slept soundly, exhausted by her flight and the emotional turmoil she had endured, the world outside continued to turn, and the forces arrayed against her were not idle. Reese, back at the pack's hidden encampment, was consumed by a mixture of worry, frustration, and a gnawing sense of guilt. He had pushed Vesper too hard, he realized, overwhelmed her with the weight of her destiny, the burden of the curse. He should have been more patient, more understanding, more gentle. He paced restlessly, his wolf form a constant presence beneath his skin, yearning to run, to hunt, to find her. He knew she was vulnerable, out there alone, a target for the hunters who sought to exploit their power. He had sent out scouts, members of his pack, to search for her, but so far they had found no trace. He feared the worst, that she had been captured or worse, injured or even killed. The hunters, led by a ruthless man named Silas, were a constant threat. They were descendants of the original betrayer, the human woman who had cursed the wolves, and they believed it was their right, their duty, to control the wolves, to use their power for their own ends. Silas was particularly obsessed with Vesper, with the mark she bore, with the power she wielded. He saw her as the key to unlocking the full potential of the curse, to giving him ultimate control over the wolves. He had been tracking Vesper for weeks, ever since the eclipse, ever since the mark had appeared. He had sensed her power, her vulnerability, and he knew that she was the one he had been waiting for. He had set a trap, a snare, not of ropes and nets, but of words and promises. He knew that Vesper was running, that she was afraid, that she was seeking guidance, answers. And he planned to use that against her. He had planted rumors, whispers, among the villagers of Black Hollow about an old woman, a wise woman, who lived in the forest, who knew the secrets of the old ones, who could help those who were different. He knew that Vesper would hear these rumors, that she would seek out this woman, and he would be waiting. As dawn approached, Vesper woke to the smell of wood smoke and herbs. Morwenna was already up, tending the fire, preparing a simple breakfast of porridge and berries. Vesper sat up, stretching her stiff muscles. She felt refreshed, rested, but the underlying sense of unease, of apprehension, remained. "Good morning, child," Morwenna said, smiling. "Sleep well?" Vesper nodded.
"Yes, thank you," she said.
"But I can't stay here. I need to go back." Morwenna's smile faded slightly. "Go back? To whom?" "To Reese," Vesper said. "To the pack. I ran away, but I think I made a mistake." Morwenna studied her, her eyes searching, probing. "Are you sure, child?" she asked. "Are you ready to face him? To face your destiny?" Vesper hesitated. She wasn't sure, not entirely. But she knew she couldn't hide here forever, in this illusion of safety. She had to face her fears, her doubts, her power. "I have to try," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. Morwenna nodded. "Very well," she said. "But be careful, child. The path ahead is dangerous, and there are those who would seek to harm you." Vesper knew she was referring to the hunters, to Silas. She felt a shiver of fear, but she also felt a surge of determination. She would not be a victim, a pawn in their game. She would fight, she would survive, she would prevail. Morwenna gave her directions, a winding path through the forest that would lead her back to the pack's encampment. She also gave her a small pouch, filled with herbs, a talisman of protection. "Wear this," she said. "It will help to shield you from harm." Vesper thanked her, her heart filled with gratitude for this strange, wise old woman who had offered her shelter, guidance, and hope. She set off, following Morwenna's directions, her senses alert, her body tense, ready for anything. The forest seemed different now, darker, more menacing. She felt as if she were being watched, hunted. She had not gone far when she heard a sound, a faint rustling in the undergrowth. She stopped, her heart pounding, her hand instinctively reaching for the pouch of herbs around her neck. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man, tall and imposing, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He carried a crossbow, the bolt tipped with silver. It was Silas. Vesper froze, her mind racing. She knew she was trapped, outmatched. She had no weapon, no defense, except for the power she barely understood, the power she was afraid to use. She was caught between a seemingly unavoidable fate and her own overwhelming fear. Chapter 10. Sanctuary in the Ruins. Silas smiled, a cold, predatory smile that sent a chill down Vesper's spine. Well, he said, his voice smooth and menacing. "Look what we have here. The moon child, all alone and lost." Vesper didn't reply, her eyes fixed on the crossbow, on the silver-tipped bolt that was aimed directly at her heart. She knew she had to do something, anything, but her mind was blank, her body frozen with fear. "Don't be afraid, girl," Silas said, his voice dripping with false reassurance. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." Vesper didn't believe him. She had heard the stories, the whispers about the hunters, about their cruelty, about their obsession with controlling the wolves. She knew that Silas saw her as a prize, a tool to be used, a weapon to be wielded. "I have nothing to say to you," Vesper said, her voice trembling but firm. Silas chuckled, a low, throaty sound that made her skin crawl. "Oh, I think you do," he said. "You have something I want, girl. Something I need. And I'm going to get it, one way or another." He took a step closer, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. Vesper instinctively recoiled, her back pressing against a tree, trapping her. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Silas ignored her, his gaze fixed on the mark on her side, which was now throbbing, pulsing with a faint, reddish gold light. "The mark," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and greed. "It's beautiful, isn't it? A symbol of power, of control. And you, girl, you are the key. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing against her dress, where the mark burned beneath. Vesper flinched, a wave of revulsion washing over her. "Don't touch me," she cried, her voice rising in panic. Silas's smile widened. "Oh, I'm going to do more than touch you, girl," he said. "I'm going to claim you. I'm going to make you mine." His words, so similar to Reese's, yet so utterly different in their intent, sparked a flicker of anger within Vesper, a spark that ignited the dormant power within her. She focused her mind, her will, on Silas, on the crossbow in his hand. She visualized the weapon shattering, breaking, just as she had done before. She felt the familiar tingling sensation in her fingertips, the surge of energy that flowed from her body towards the hunter. But this time it was different. It was stronger, more intense, more uncontrolled. The crossbow didn't just splinter, it exploded, sending shards of wood and metal flying in all directions. Silas cried out in pain and surprise, stumbling back, his hand bleeding. Vesper stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and fear. She had done it again, but this time, it had been too much. She had almost killed him. She knew she had to get away, to escape before he recovered, before he used his own power, his own weapons, against her. She turned and ran, blindly, desperately, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from Silas, from the hunters, from the danger that surrounded her. She ran until she stumbled upon an ancient ruin, a crumbling stone structure hidden deep within the forest. It was a forgotten place, a relic of a bygone era, its walls overgrown with ivy, its roof partially collapsed. She scrambled inside, seeking shelter, sanctuary, a place to hide, to catch her breath, to think. The interior was dark and damp, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. Moonlight filtered through the gaps in the roof, casting eerie shadows on the crumbling walls. She found a small, relatively intact chamber, a former chapel, perhaps, with a stone altar at one end. She collapsed on the floor, her body trembling, her mind racing. She was safe for now, but she knew it wouldn't last. Silas would be coming after her, and he wouldn't be alone. She was trapped, cornered, with nowhere to go. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing heart, trying to think, to plan. But all she could see was Silas's face, his cold, predatory smile, his eyes burning with that feverish intensity. She felt a wave of despair, of hopelessness. She was just a girl, alone and afraid, facing a power she didn't understand, a destiny she didn't want. But then, she remembered Reese. She remembered his words, his promise, his unwavering belief in her. She remembered the bond, the connection they shared, the power that flowed between them. She reached out with her mind, her senses, searching for him, calling to him, hoping he could hear her, hoping he could find her. "Reese," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her heart filled with a desperate plea. "Help me." And as the moonlight streamed through the gaps in the ruined roof, illuminating the ancient stones, she waited, hoping, praying, that he would come. She focused on him, to strengthen the bond, and send out her plea. Chapter 11. Unveiling the Ancient Curse. The whispered plea, carried on the fragile threads of the bond, reached Reese. He was miles away, back at the pack's encampment, but he felt a sudden surge of fear, of desperation, of a connection that pulsed with a desperate urgency. He stopped mid-stride, his head snapping up, his golden eyes narrowing. "Vesper," he breathed, his voice a low growl. He felt it again. A desperate cry, a plea for help sent out between heartbeats. He turned to the other members of his pack, who were watching him, their expressions a mixture of concern and confusion. "She's in trouble," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "I have to go." He didn't wait for a reply. He shifted, his body transforming into his wolf form, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his midnight black fur. He let out a howl, a call to the pack, a signal of his departure, and then he was gone, racing through the forest, following the thread of the bond, the faint echo of Vesper's fear. Meanwhile, Vesper, huddled in the ruins, waited, her hope dwindling with each passing moment. She had called to Rhys, but she didn't know if he had heard her, if he could find her, if he could reach her in time. She heard the sound of footsteps, approaching fast, and her heart sank. It was Silas, she knew it. He had found her. She braced herself, ready to fight, to defend herself, even though she knew it was futile. She had used the power once, but it had been uncontrolled, dangerous. She was afraid to use it again, afraid of what might happen. But then, she heard another sound, a low growl, a familiar rumble that echoed through the ruins. It wasn't Silas. It was Rhys. He burst into the chamber, his wolf form magnificent and terrifying, his golden eyes burning with a fierce, protective rage. He stood between Vesper and the entrance, blocking Silas's path, a guardian, a protector, a mate. Silas, who had just entered the ruins, stopped short, his eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing in anger. "You," he snarled, his voice filled with hatred. "I should have known you'd be involved." Rhys let out a low growl, his hackles raised, his teeth bared. He was ready to fight, to kill, to protect Vesper at any cost. But Vesper didn't want him to fight. She didn't want anyone to get hurt, especially not Rhys. She had seen the power of the hunters, their ruthlessness, their willingness to use any means necessary to achieve their goals. She stepped forward, placing herself between Rhys and Silas, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Stop," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. "This doesn't have to end in violence." Silas laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You're naive, girl," he said. "This is the only way it can end. With your submission, with your power in my hands." Vesper shook her head.
"No," she said.
"There has to be another way. A way to break the curse, to free the wolves, to end this cycle of violence and hatred." Silas scoffed. "The curse cannot be broken," he said. "It is our legacy, our right, our destiny." "It's a lie," Vesper countered, her voice gaining strength. "It's a story, a twisted version of the truth, used to justify your cruelty, your greed, your lust for power." Silas's eyes narrowed. "What do you know of the truth, girl?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Vesper took a deep breath, remembering the words of Morwenna, the echoes of a forgotten past that she had begun to understand. "I know that the curse was not a punishment," she said. "It was a sacrifice, a desperate attempt to save the wolves, to protect them from a greater evil." Silas stared at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Vesper continued, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke, as the truth, the ancient truth, unfolded within her. "The old ones," she said, "they were not just beings of power. They were guardians, protectors of the balance between the human world and the wild. But there was a threat, a darkness, that sought to consume both worlds. The woman, your ancestor, she was not a villain. She was a heroine. She made a pact with the wolves, a desperate bargain, to save them, to save the world. She took the power of the old ones, a portion of it, and used it to bind the wolves, to hide them, to protect them from the darkness. The mark," she said, touching her side, "it's not a symbol of control, it's a shield, a protection, a reminder of the sacrifice that was made." Silas was silent, his eyes fixed on Vesper, his mind struggling to comprehend her words, to reconcile them with the stories he had been told, the beliefs he had held his entire life. Rhys, in his wolf form, watched Vesper, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of awe and pride. He had never heard this version of the story, this interpretation of the curse. It resonated with him, with the ancient knowledge that flowed through his blood, with the yearning for freedom that had driven his pack for generations. Vesper turned to Rhys, her eyes pleading for understanding, for acceptance. "It's the truth, Rhys," she said. "I know it is. The curse, it was meant to protect you, not to enslave you." Rhys shifted back into his human form, his gaze locked on Vesper's. He saw the conviction in her eyes, the sincerity in her voice, the power that radiated from her. He believed her. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, his grip strong and reassuring. "I believe you, Vesper," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I will help you break the curse." Silas, witnessing this exchange, this joining of forces, this revelation of truth, felt a surge of rage, of desperation. He had been wrong all along. He had been fighting the wrong enemy, pursuing the wrong goal. He raised his crossbow, aiming at Vesper, his finger tightening on the trigger. "It's a lie," he screamed, his voice filled with a desperate denial. "It's all a lie." The curse felt like it was burning in that moment. Chapter 12. Blood and Betrayal. The silver-tipped bolt flew through the air, a deadly projectile aimed directly at Vesper's heart. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The moment stretched out, filled with a terrifying inevitability. Reese reacted instantly, his instincts honed by centuries of survival. He shoved Vesper aside, interposing his own body between her and the deadly bolt. The bolt struck Reese in the shoulder, piercing his flesh, the silver burning like acid in his veins. He cried out in pain, a guttural roar that echoed through the ruins. Vesper screamed, her eyes wide with horror. She watched as Reese stumbled, his knees buckling, his body collapsing to the ground. She rushed to his side, cradling his head in her lap, her hands trembling as she tried to staunch the flow of blood. The wound was deep, the silver already working its poison, weakening him, draining his life force. "Reese," she cried, her voice choked with tears. "Stay with me. Please, stay with me." Reese looked up at her, his golden eyes filled with pain, but also with a fierce, unwavering love. "Vesper," he whispered, his voice weak and raspy.
I'm sorry."
"Don't be sorry," Vesper sobbed, her tears falling onto his face.
"You saved me."
"You saved me again." Reese smiled, a faint, fleeting expression that tore at Vesper's heart. "Always," he whispered. "I will always protect you." His eyes began to close, his breathing becoming shallow and ragged. Vesper felt a surge of panic, of despair. She couldn't lose him. Not now, not after everything they had been through. She remembered the power, the ancient magic that flowed through her veins. She had used it before, to defend herself, to save Reese from the hunters. Could she use it now, to heal him, to save his life? She didn't know, but she had to try. She placed her hands on his wound, her fingers pressing against the torn flesh, the burning silver. She closed her eyes, focusing her mind, her will, on healing, on restoring, on saving. She felt the familiar tingling sensation in her fingertips, the surge of energy that flowed from her body into Reese's. But this time it was different. It was stronger, more intense, more demanding. She felt a searing pain in her chest, a burning sensation that spread throughout her body. It was as if the power was drawing on her own life force, her own energy, to heal Reese. She gritted her teeth, enduring the pain, refusing to give up. She focused all her will, all her love, all her hope on Reese, on saving him, on keeping him alive. Silas, who had been watching this scene with a mixture of shock and disbelief, saw his opportunity. He raised his crossbow again, aiming at Vesper, at her exposed back. "Foolish girl," he snarled. "You can't save him. The silver, it's too strong." He was about to pull the trigger, to end Vesper's life, to claim the power for himself, when a figure emerged from the shadows, a figure as swift and silent as a wraith. It was Morwenna. She moved with a speed and agility that belied her age, her gnarled walking stick striking Silas's hand, knocking the crossbow from his grip. Silas cried out in surprise and pain, turning to face his unexpected attacker. "You!" he exclaimed, his eyes filled with rage. "You interfered." Morwenna stood before him, her eyes blazing with a fierce, ancient power. "I will not let you harm her," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "She is the chosen one, the one who will break the curse, the one who will bring balance back to this land." Silas lunged at her, his hands clawing, his face contorted with fury. But Morwenna was too quick, too skilled. She dodged his attack, her walking stick striking him again and again, with precise, devastating blows. Silas, weakened and disoriented, stumbled back, collapsing to the ground, defeated. Morwenna turned her attention to Vesper, who was still kneeling beside Rhys, her hands still pressed to his wound, her body trembling with the effort of channeling the power. "Child," Morwenna said, her voice gentle but firm. "You must stop. You are draining your own life force. You will kill yourself." Vesper shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't stop," she sobbed. "I have to save him." Morwenna placed a hand on Vesper's shoulder, her touch calming, reassuring. "He will live, child," she said. "The silver it is weakened. Your love, your power, it has slowed the poison. But you must rest now. You must recover." Vesper, exhausted and drained, finally relented, removing her hands from Rhys's wound. She looked at him, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and fear. He was still alive, but he was weak, unconscious. Morwenna examined the wound, her eyes assessing.
"He needs to be moved," she said.
"To a safe place, where he can heal." She helped Vesper lift Rhys, supporting his weight, guiding them out of the ruins, back towards her cottage, towards a sanctuary, a place of healing, a place of hope. As they moved through the night, Vesper had only one thought. Please, let him be all right. Chapter 13. The Price of Freedom. The journey back to Morwenna's cottage was agonizingly slow. Rhys, despite being in his human form, was heavy, his unconscious weight a constant reminder of the price he had paid for her safety. Vesper, weakened by her own exertion of power and drained by the emotional toll, struggled with every step. Morwenna, though surprisingly strong for her age, could only offer limited assistance. They moved through the darkness, the forest silent except for the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Vesper focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on keeping Rhys stable, on ignoring the burning ache in her muscles and the gnawing fear in her heart. She kept glancing at Rhys's face, searching for any sign of consciousness, any indication that he was improving. But his eyes remained closed, his breathing shallow and ragged, his skin pale and clammy. Finally, they reached the cottage, the warm glow of the firelight spilling out through the windows, a beacon of hope in the darkness. They laid Rhys on the bed, Morwenna immediately tending to his wound, cleaning it, applying a poultice of herbs, murmuring ancient words of healing. Vesper sat beside him, holding his hand, her eyes fixed on his face, willing him to wake up, to open his eyes, to speak to her. She felt a crushing weight of guilt, of responsibility. He had been hurt because of her, because of the curse, because of the power she wielded. Morwenna, finished with her ministrations, turned to Vesper, her expression grave. "He is stable," she said, "but he is weak. The silverite has taken its toll. He needs time, rest, and more." "More?" Vesper asked, her voice filled with apprehension. "More what?" Morwenna hesitated, her gaze flickering to Rhys, then back to Vesper. "The bond," she said. "The connection between you. It is strong, but it is strained. It needs to be strengthened, reinforced, to help him heal." Vesper understood. The bond, the magical connection that tied them together, was not just a curse, it was also a source of power, of healing. It could be used to save Rhys, but it would require a sacrifice. What do I have to do?" Vesper asked, her voice barely a whisper. Morwenna explained, her voice low and steady, outlining the ancient ritual, the steps they needed to take, the price Vesper would have to pay. It involved a sharing of blood, a mingling of energies, a deeper connection that would bind them together, not just magically, but emotionally, spiritually. It was a commitment, a joining, a mating. Vesper felt a wave of fear, of hesitation. This was more than she had bargained for, more than she had ever imagined. It was a step into the unknown, a surrender of her will, herself, to a power, a destiny she still didn't fully understand. But she looked at Rhys, at his pale face, at his labored breathing, at the wound that was slowly, but surely, healing, thanks to her efforts, thanks to Morwenna's skill. She knew what she had to do. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. "I'll do whatever it takes to save him." Morwenna nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Very well," she said. "Then let us begin." The ritual was simple, yet profound. Morwenna prepared a mixture of herbs, a potent brew that smelled of earth and magic. She made a small incision on Vesper's arm, and then on Rhys's, letting their blood mingle in a small bowl. She chanted ancient words, words of power, of binding, of healing, her voice rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence. Vesper felt a strange sensation, a tingling warmth that spread throughout her body, a connection that deepened, intensified, with every passing moment. She looked at Rhys, and she saw a change. His breathing became easier, his skin regained some of its color, his muscles relaxed. He was healing, recovering, thanks to the bond, thanks to her sacrifice. The ritual complete, Morwenna bandaged their wounds, her expression satisfied. "It is done," she said. "The bond is strengthened. He will recover." Vesper felt a wave of relief, of exhaustion, of something else. Something deeper, something more profound. She felt connected to Rhys in a way she had never felt before, a bond that went beyond magic, beyond the curse, a bond of love, of sacrifice, of shared destiny. She sat beside him, holding his hand, watching him sleep, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She had saved him, but at what cost? What would this deeper bond mean for their future, for their relationship, for her? She felt a slight stirring and saw Rhys's eyelashes flutter. Chapter 14. A Love Forbidden. Rhys's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened, revealing his golden eyes, clouded with pain and confusion. He blinked, his gaze focusing on Vesper, a flicker of recognition, of relief, crossing his features. "Vesper," he whispered, his voice weak and raspy. "Rhys," Vesper replied, her voice choked with emotion, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're awake. You're alive." She squeezed his hand, her touch gentle but firm, conveying the depth of her relief, her gratitude, her love. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through his shoulder, causing him to wince and fall back against the pillows. "Easy," Vesper said, her voice soothing, her hand resting on his chest, calming him. "You're still weak. You need to rest." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to understand what had happened, how he had gotten here. "The hunters," he whispered, his voice fragmented. "Silas the Bolt," Vesper nodded. "You saved me," she said. "You took the bolt for me. But you're going to be all right. Morwenna healed you, and we strengthened the bond." He frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion.
"The bond?"
Vesper explained, her voice hesitant, unsure how he would react to the news of the ritual, of the deeper connection they now shared. He listened in silence, his eyes fixed on hers, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw clenching, his body tense. Vesper felt a pang of fear, of apprehension. Had she done the right thing? Had she made a mistake, forcing this deeper bond upon him, without his consent? He opened his eyes, his gaze intense, penetrating. "You gave your blood?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and something else. Something that sounded like gratitude. Vesper nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her cheek, his thumb gently stroking the skin beneath her eye. "Thank you, Vesper," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "You saved my life again." Vesper felt a wave of relief, of warmth, wash over her. He wasn't angry, he wasn't resentful. He understood, he accepted, he appreciated. "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice soft, her gaze locked on his. "I couldn't lose you." He smiled, a faint, fleeting expression that reached his golden eyes, softening their edges. "And I couldn't lose you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The words, spoken with such sincerity, such tenderness, resonated deep within Vesper's heart. They were more than just words of gratitude. They were an acknowledgement of the bond, of the connection, of the love that was growing between them. But it was a love forbidden, a love complicated by the curse, by the ancient feud between their bloodlines, by the dangers that surrounded them. They were from different worlds, she a human, he a werewolf, bound by a magical connection, a shared destiny, but separated by centuries of hatred, of mistrust, of fear. The villagers of Black Hollow would never accept their relationship. The hunters would seek to exploit it, to destroy them, and even Reese's own pack might question his loyalty, his judgment. They were caught between two worlds, belonging to neither, their love a fragile flame in a storm of darkness and conflict. Reese, sensing her turmoil, her apprehension, tightened his grip on her hand, his touch reassuring, grounding. "We will face this together, Vesper," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." His words, his promise, gave her strength, gave her hope. But she also knew that the path ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges, dangers, sacrifices. They were bound by a love forbidden, a love that could either save them or destroy them. But it was a love that, despite all the obstacles, all the risks, they were both willing to fight for. Their love was their only truth, their only reality. A tear escaped and traced its way down Vesper's cheek. Reese, with more strength than she thought he possessed, reached out and captured it with his thumb. He studied the tear as if it were a precious jewel, a treasure to be guarded. The silence was broken only by the crackle of the fire. Chapter 15. Scars of the Soul. The silence in the cottage was thick with unspoken emotions, with the weight of their shared history, with the uncertainty of their future. The fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls, a stark contrast to the somber mood that had settled over them. Reese, still weak but recovering, continued to hold Vesper's gaze, his golden eyes filled with a depth of feeling that both comforted and unsettled her. He knew the challenges they faced, the obstacles that stood in their way, but he also knew the strength of their bond, the power of their love, the hope that flickered between them. Vesper, her heart still pounding from the emotional intensity of the past few days, felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and trepidation. She had saved Reese, they had strengthened the bond, but the world outside remained unchanged. The dangers still lurked, the future still uncertain. She looked at his wound, now bandaged and healing, a visible reminder of the price he had paid for her safety. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the edges of the bandage, her touch light and tender. "Does it still hurt?" she asked, her voice soft, concerned. Reese shook his head. "Not as much," he said. "The pain is manageable." But Vesper knew that the physical wound was only part of the pain he carried. There were deeper scars, scars of the soul, wounds inflicted by the curse, by the centuries of oppression, by the constant threat of the hunters. She had seen those scars in his eyes, in the fleeting moments of vulnerability that he allowed himself to reveal. She had felt them in the tremor of his touch, in the unspoken fears that haunted his dreams. She wanted to heal those scars, to ease his pain, to offer him the comfort and solace he so desperately needed. But she knew that some wounds were too deep, too ingrained, to be healed by magic alone. "I know it's not just the wound," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's everything. The curse, the hunters, the responsibility." Reese sighed, his gaze dropping to his hands, his fingers clenching into fists. "It's a heavy burden, Vesper," he said. "One I have carried for most of my life. The weight of my pack, their safety, their freedom, it rests on my shoulders." Vesper understood. She had felt the weight of responsibility herself, the burden of her own destiny, the power she wielded, the choices she had to make. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his, her grip strong and reassuring. "You're not alone, Reese," she said. "I'm here. We're in this together. We'll share the burden." He looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and doubt. "It's not your burden to bear, Vesper," he said. "You shouldn't have to carry this weight, this curse." Vesper shook her head. "It is my burden," she said. "The mark, the bond, our connection, it makes it mine. And I choose to share it with you." Her words, spoken with such conviction, such sincerity, touched Rhys deeply. He had always believed that he had to carry this burden alone, that he had to protect others from the darkness, the danger. But Vesper was offering him something he had never dared to hope for: partnership, support, shared responsibility. He tightened his grip on her hand, his eyes searching hers, as if seeking confirmation, reassurance. "Are you sure, Vesper?" he asked. "Are you sure you want this? This life, it's not easy. It's filled with danger, with sacrifice, with pain." Vesper met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a newfound determination, a quiet strength. "I'm sure," she said. "I'm not afraid. Not anymore. I have you, and we have each other." Her words, her unwavering belief in their bond, in their love, gave Rhys a surge of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness that had surrounded him for so long. He leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that conveyed the depth of his feelings, his gratitude, his love. It was a kiss that sealed their pact, their commitment, their shared destiny. But even as they kissed, as they found solace in each other's arms, they both knew that the scars of the soul remained, that the challenges still lay ahead, that the price of freedom might be higher than they ever imagined. The taste of salt was on both of their lips, and the unspoken fear of what was to come hung in the air between them. The world would not just let them be. Chapter 16. The Gathering Storm. The kiss, a moment of shared solace and unspoken promises, lingered in the air even after they parted. The outside world, with its threats and uncertainties, seemed to fade away, replaced by the intimacy of their connection, the warmth of their shared breath. But the reprieve was temporary. The storm that had been brewing for weeks, for months, for generations, was about to break. Morwenna, who had been quietly observing them, cleared her throat, her expression grave. "I hate to intrude," she said, "but we have a problem." Vesper and Rhys looked at her, their expressions shifting from tenderness to concern. "What is it?" Rhys asked, his voice still rough from his injury. Morwenna gestured towards the window, where the sky was beginning to darken, the clouds gathering, the wind picking up. "The full moon is approaching," she said. "And with it, the hunters will be at their strongest." Vesper felt a chill run down her spine. She had almost forgotten about the hunters, about Silas, about the threat they posed. She had been so focused on Rhys, on their bond, on their love, that she had allowed herself to forget the dangers that lurked outside. Rhys, sensing her fear, squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'll be ready for them," he said, his voice firm, his golden eyes burning with determination. But Morwenna shook her head. "It's not just the hunters," she said. "There's something else. Something bigger." "What do you mean?" Vesper asked, her voice filled with apprehension. Morwenna explained, her voice low and steady, outlining the ancient prophecy, the words that had been passed down through generations, the warning that had been ignored, dismissed as folklore. The eclipse, she said, it was not just a sign, it was a catalyst. It awakened the dormant power, not just in Vesper, but in others. "Others?" Rhys repeated, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What others?" "The old ones," Morwenna said. "The beings of power who once ruled this land. They are not gone, they are merely sleeping. And the eclipse has begun to awaken them." Vesper felt a wave of dizziness, of disbelief. The old ones, the beings of myth and legend, the source of the power that flowed through her veins, they were real? And they were waking up? "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It means that the balance is shifting," Morwenna said. "The power is returning, and with it, the ancient conflicts, the old rivalries, the struggle for control." Rhys, understanding the implications, felt a surge of dread. This was bigger than the hunters, bigger than the curse, bigger than anything they had ever faced before. This was a war, a battle for the fate of their world, a conflict that could consume them all. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. Morwenna looked at them, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "We must prepare," she said. "We must gather our allies, strengthen our defenses, and learn to control the power." "Control the power?" Vesper repeated, her mind racing. She had barely begun to understand her own abilities, her own connection to the old ones. How could she possibly control a power that was ancient, unpredictable, and potentially destructive? Yes, Morwenna said. The power of the old ones is not just a weapon, it is a responsibility. It must be wielded wisely, carefully, or it will consume us all. She turned to Vesper, her gaze intense, penetrating. You child, she said, you are the key. You are the marked one, the one who holds the connection, the one who can guide us. Vesper felt the weight of responsibility settle upon her shoulders, a burden heavier than anything she had ever imagined. She was not just Vesper Whitmore, the outcast of Black Hollow. She was the chosen one, the one who would lead them through this storm, this conflict, this war. She looked at Rhys, her eyes searching his, seeking his support, his strength, his love. He met her gaze, his golden eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering belief in her. We'll do it together, Vesper, he said. We always do. His words, his promise, gave her the courage she needed, the strength to face the gathering storm, the uncertainty of the future, the destiny that awaited them. They are no longer just fighting for themselves, but for the survival of their very kind. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, a prelude to the chaos that was about to be unleashed. The full moon was rising, casting an eerie, silver glow over the landscape, a symbol of the power that was awakening, the conflict that was brewing, the storm that was about to break. A single wolf howl broke the silence, and it was followed by dozens more. Chapter 17. Shadows of Doubt. The chorus of howls, a symphony of wildness and warning, echoed through the night, sending a shiver down Vesper's spine. It was a call to arms, a signal of the impending conflict, a reminder of the forces arrayed against them. Rhys, his senses heightened, his instincts on high alert, stood beside Vesper, his hand resting on the small of her back, a silent gesture of support and protection. He could feel the tension radiating from her, the fear that gnawed at her, the doubts that clouded her mind. It's all right, Vesper, he said, his voice low and reassuring. We'll face this together. We always do. But even as he spoke the words, he felt a flicker of uncertainty, a shadow of doubt that crept into his own heart. This was bigger than anything they had ever faced before, a conflict that could consume them all, a war that might be unwinnable. He looked at Vesper, at her pale face, at her wide, apprehensive eyes, at the mark on her side, pulsing with a faint, reddish gold light. He saw the burden she carried, the responsibility that had been thrust upon her, the fear that she tried so hard to conceal. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the darkness, the danger, but he knew he couldn't. She was the chosen one, the key, the one who had to lead them through this storm. He could only stand beside her, offer her his support, his strength, his love. Are you sure you're ready for this, Vesper? He asked, his voice gentle but probing. This is not going to be easy. It's going to be dangerous, terrifying, and there's a chance we might not make it. Vesper met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. I don't know if I'm ready, she confessed, her voice trembling slightly.
But I have to try.
I have to do what I can to protect everyone. Her words, her selflessness, her unwavering commitment to others, touched Rhys deeply. He had always admired her strength, her resilience, her compassion, but now he saw a new dimension to her character, a depth of courage that he had never fully appreciated. He reached out and cupped her cheek, his thumb gently stroking the skin beneath her eye. You are amazing, Vesper, he said, his voice raw with emotion. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and I love you. The words, spoken with such sincerity, such tenderness, brought tears to Vesper's eyes. She had longed to hear those words, to feel that connection, that love, but she had also feared it, doubted it, questioned its place in their chaotic world. I love you too, Rhys, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. They embraced, their bodies clinging together, finding solace in each other's arms, drawing strength from their shared bond, their shared love. It was a moment of intimacy, of vulnerability, of truth. But the moment was fleeting. The shadows of doubt, the whispers of fear, the weight of responsibility soon returned, casting a pall over their fragile connection. Vesper pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his, her mind racing with questions, with uncertainties. "What if I fail, Rhys?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What if I can't control the power? What if I make things worse?" Rhys tightened his grip on her, his gaze firm, unwavering. "You won't fail, Vesper," he said. "I believe in you. We all believe in you. You have the strength, the courage, the power to do this." But Vesper wasn't so sure. She had seen the darkness, the potential for destruction, that lurked within the power of the old ones. She had felt it herself, the seductive pull, the intoxicating allure, the temptation to use it for her own ends. She remembered Silas, his obsession with the power, his willingness to kill, to destroy, to achieve his goals. She feared that she might become like him, that the power might corrupt her, consume her, turn her into something monstrous. "I'm afraid, Rhys," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid of the power, of what it might do to me, of what I might become." Rhys understood her fear. He had seen it before, in others who had wielded the power, in those who had succumbed to its darkness. He had felt it himself, the constant struggle to control the wolf within, to balance the primal instincts with the human reason. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, his grip strong and reassuring. "We all have darkness within us, Vesper," he said. "It's a part of being human, a part of being alive. But it's not the darkness that defines us, it's the choices we make, the actions we take, the love we embrace." His words, his wisdom, his unwavering belief in her, gave Vesper a flicker of hope, a glimmer of light in the shadows of doubt that surrounded her. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a renewed determination, a quiet strength. "You're right, Rhys," she said. "It's not the power that matters, it's how we use it. And I choose to use it for good, to protect those I love, to fight for what's right, to break the curse." Rhys smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his golden eyes. "That's my girl," he said, his voice filled with pride and love. They both stared into each other's eyes, the fear that was between them melting away, replaced by hope. Chapter 18. The Heart's True North. The shared gaze, a silent affirmation of their love and commitment, held for a long moment, a sanctuary in the midst of the gathering storm. The fear didn't vanish entirely, but it receded, replaced by a sense of purpose, a quiet determination that emanated from their joined hands, their intertwined souls. But the world outside wouldn't wait. The full moon was reaching its zenith, bathing the landscape in an eerie, silver glow, amplifying the magical energies, stirring the ancient powers, drawing the battle lines. Morwenna, who had been patiently waiting, stepped forward, her expression somber but resolute.
"It's time," she said.
"We must go." Vesper and Rhys nodded, their hands separating, their gazes shifting from each other to the task ahead. They had a plan, a desperate gamble, a strategy that relied on Vesper's connection to the Old Ones, on Rhys's leadership of the pack, on Morwenna's ancient knowledge and wisdom. They would go to the heart of the ancient forest, to the place where the veil between the worlds was thinnest, where the power of the Old Ones was strongest. They would attempt to communicate with the awakened beings, to negotiate, to plead, to find a way to restore balance, to prevent the impending war. It was a long shot, a risky maneuver, a path fraught with danger and uncertainty. But it was their only hope, their last chance to save their world, to protect their loved ones, to forge a future together. They left the cottage, stepping out into the moonlit night, the air thick with magic, with anticipation, with dread. The forest seemed alive, the trees whispering secrets, the shadows dancing, the creatures of the night stirring. Rhys shifted into his wolf form, his magnificent body radiating power and grace, his golden eyes burning with a fierce, protective light. He would lead the way, his senses heightened, his instincts honed, guarding them from any immediate threats. Vesper, walking beside him, felt a surge of connection, of understanding, of love for this creature, this man, who was her protector, her partner, her mate. She reached out and touched his fur, her fingers tracing the contours of his powerful muscles, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. Morwenna, walking behind them, carried her gnarled walking stick, her eyes scanning the surroundings, her mind focused on the ancient rituals, the words of power, the guidance she would offer. They moved through the forest, silently, swiftly, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth, their breaths mingling with the cool night air. They were a strange trio, a human girl marked by destiny, a werewolf alpha bound by a curse, and an ancient woman wielding forgotten magic. But they were united, bound by a shared purpose, a common goal, a love that transcended their differences. As they approached the heart of the forest, the air grew thicker, the magic more intense, the sense of otherness more palpable. They could feel the presence of the old ones, the ancient beings of power, stirring, awakening, their consciousness reaching out, probing, questioning. Vesper felt a tingling sensation in her fingertips, a surge of energy that flowed through her body, a connection to the ancient power that resonated deep within her soul. She knew they were close, that they were about to face the ultimate test, the final challenge, the destiny that awaited them. They reached a clearing, a sacred space bathed in the silvery glow of the full moon. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of ancient stones, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings, their presence radiating a power that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. This was the place, the heart of the ancient forest, the nexus of power, the gateway to the otherworld. Rhys, in his wolf form, stood at the edge of the clearing, his body tense, his senses alert, ready to defend Vesper and Morwenna from any threat. Morwenna stepped forward, her eyes closed, her hands raised, her voice chanting ancient words, invoking the old ones, calling upon their wisdom, their power, their guidance. Vesper stood beside her, her heart pounding, her breath catching in her throat. She felt a strange sensation, a pulling, a drawing, a connection to something vast, ancient, and powerful. The air shimmered, the stones glowed, the ground trembled. The veil between the worlds was thinning, opening, revealing a glimpse of something beyond. Vesper felt a surge of fear, but also a surge of excitement. This was it, the moment of truth, the chance to change their destiny, to save their world, to forge a new future. She closed her own eyes, focused, and allowed herself to follow her heart's true north. It always guided her. Chapter 19. The Ritual of Binding. As Vesper closed her eyes, she felt herself drifting, floating, drawn into a realm beyond the physical, beyond the limitations of time and space. She was no longer standing in the clearing, surrounded by ancient stones and the whispering forest. She was somewhere else. She saw swirling colors, heard ethereal sounds, felt sensations that were both familiar and utterly alien. It was a world of pure energy, of raw power, of consciousness. She sensed the presence of the old ones, vast, ancient beings of immense power, their minds reaching out, probing, questioning. They were curious, wary, and uncertain. They had been awakened from their long slumber, disturbed by the surge of magic, by the eclipse, by the marked one. They were not inherently malevolent, but they were not inherently benevolent either. They were forces of nature, ancient powers that could be used for good or for evil, for creation or destruction. Vesper, guided by her instincts, by her connection to the power, by her love for Rhys and for her world, reached out to them, her mind open, her heart vulnerable, her intentions pure. She spoke to them, not with words, but with thoughts, with feelings, with images. She showed them the curse, the suffering of the wolves, the greed of the hunters, the imbalance in the world. She showed them her bond with Rhys, their love, their commitment, their shared desire for peace, for freedom, for a future where humans and werewolves could coexist, where the ancient powers could be used for healing, for harmony, for balance. The old ones listened, observed, considered. They were not easily swayed, not easily moved. They had seen countless generations rise and fall, countless conflicts erupt and subside, countless promises made and broken. But they also sensed something different in Vesper, something unique, something compelling. They saw her courage, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to others, her willingness to sacrifice herself for the greater good. They saw the strength of her bond with Reese, the power of their love, the potential for a new future, a different path, a way to break the cycle of violence and hatred. And they responded, not with words, not with promises, but with a feeling, a sense of understanding, of acceptance, of willingness to help. They showed Vesper a vision, a glimpse of the future, a path to breaking the curse, to restoring balance, to forging a new alliance between humans and werewolves. It was a difficult path, a dangerous journey, a ritual that would require sacrifice, commitment, and trust. It was a ritual of binding, not of enslavement, but of partnership, of shared power, of mutual respect. Vesper understood. The curse, the ancient pact, had been twisted, corrupted, used for selfish ends. It was time to restore the original intention, to create a new bond, a new alliance, a new destiny. She opened her eyes, returning to the clearing, to the physical world, to the presence of Reese and Morwenna. They were watching her, their expressions a mixture of hope and apprehension. "It worked," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. They listened. They showed me a way. Reese, shifting back into his human form, rushed to her side, his hands cupping her face, his golden eyes searching hers. "What did they show you?" he asked, his voice filled with urgency. Vesper explained, outlining the vision, the ritual, the sacrifice, the commitment that was required. It involved a gathering of the pack, a ceremony under the full moon, a mingling of blood, a sharing of power, a declaration of intent. It was a ritual that would bind Vesper and Reese together, not just as mates, but as leaders, as partners, as equals. It was a ritual that would bind the wolves to the power of the old ones, not as slaves, but as guardians, as protectors, as allies. It was a ritual that would break the curse, restore balance, and forge a new future for their world. Reese listened intently, his mind racing, his heart pounding. It was a risky plan, a dangerous undertaking, but it was also their only hope, their last chance. He looked at Vesper, his eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering love. "We'll do it," he said. "We'll do it together." Morwenna nodded, her expression resolute.
"It is the only way," she said.
The time has come to break the chains, to reclaim the power, to forge a new destiny. The ritual had begun. The stones were now emanating a palpable energy. The air was electric. Vesper looked to Reese, and then to Morwenna. It was time. Chapter 20. Breaking the Chains. The clearing pulsed with an otherworldly energy, the ancient stones glowing with an intense, silver light, the air crackling with the raw power of the old ones. The full moon, hanging high in the sky, bathed the scene in an ethereal glow, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. The members of Reese's pack, summoned by his earlier howl, had gathered at the edge of the clearing, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe, fear, and anticipation. They had sensed the shift in the magical energies, the awakening of the ancient powers, the impending change. They watched as Vesper, Reese, and Morwenna stood in the center of the stone circle, their figures silhouetted against the moonlit sky, their faces illuminated by the otherworldly glow. Morwenna began the ritual, chanting ancient words, invoking the old ones, calling upon their power, their guidance, their blessing. Her voice, strong and resonant, echoed through the forest, carrying the weight of centuries, the hopes of generations, the promise of a new future. Vesper and Reese stood side by side, their hands clasped together, their bodies touching, their hearts beating in unison. They felt the power surge through them, a tingling energy that connected them to each other, to the old ones, to the very earth beneath their feet. Morwenna produced a small, silver knife, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. She made a small incision on Vesper's palm, and then on Reese's, letting their blood mingle in a small, stone bowl. The scent of blood, mingled with the aroma of herbs and the raw power of the old ones, filled the air, a potent, primal scent that stirred something deep within the wolves, awakening their ancient instincts, their connection to the land, to the magic. Morwenna raised the bowl, offering it to the sky, to the moon, to the old ones, a symbol of their sacrifice, their commitment, their shared destiny. She then poured the blood onto the ground, at the center of the stone circle, where it seeped into the earth, nourishing the ancient roots, awakening the dormant power, forging a new connection, a new alliance. Vesper and Reese, their hands still clasped together, stepped forward, standing over the blood-soaked earth. They closed their eyes, focusing their minds, their wills, their love on the task ahead. They spoke in unison, their voices blending together, echoing Morwenna's chant, affirming their commitment, declaring their intent, forging a new pact, a new bond. "We are one," they said, "bound by blood, by magic, by love. We are the guardians," they continued, "the protectors, the allies. We break the chains," they proclaimed. "We restore the balance. We forge a new destiny." As they spoke the words, the power surged, the stones glowed brighter, the air crackled with an even greater intensity. The full moon seemed to pulse, radiating a wave of energy that washed over the clearing, over the forest, over the entire world. The wolves, watching from the edge of the clearing, felt the shift, the change, the breaking of the curse. They felt the power returning, the freedom restored, the ancient connection renewed. They let out a chorus of howls, a symphony of joy, of relief, of triumph. It was a sound that echoed through the night, a sound that proclaimed the dawn of a new era, a new age, a new destiny. Vesper and Reese, standing in the center of the stone circle, felt the power flow through them, transforming them, binding them together, making them one. They opened their eyes, their gazes locking, their hearts filled with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and love. The curse was broken. The chains were shattered. The future was theirs. But even as they celebrated their victory, as they embraced their newfound freedom, they knew that the challenges were not over. The hunters remained. The old prejudices lingered. The world needed to be rebuilt. But they were ready. They were together. They were strong. They were free. Vesper and Reese looked at each other and smiled, a smile filled with hope and love. The night skies sparkled above them. Epilogue. The years that followed were not without their trials. The ingrained prejudices of Black Hollow's villagers didn't vanish overnight. Silas's loyalists, though scattered and weakened, still posed a threat, fueled by resentment and a thirst for revenge. Rebuilding trust and fostering understanding between humans and werewolves required patience, diplomacy, and, occasionally, a show of strength. But Vesper and Reese, bound by their love and empowered by their shared connection to the old ones, persevered. They led by example, demonstrating compassion, fairness, and an unwavering commitment to the well-being of both their communities. Vesper, no longer the ostracized moonchild, became a bridge between two worlds. She used her knowledge of herbs and healing, inherited from Alara and expanded upon by Morwenna, to help both humans and werewolves. Her gentle nature and unwavering empathy gradually chipped away at the fear and mistrust that had poisoned Black Hollow for generations. Reese, with Vesper by his side, ruled the Blackwood Pack with wisdom and strength. He enforced the ancient laws, protecting the forest and its inhabitants, but he also embraced change, fostering cooperation with the humans, sharing resources, and building a future based on mutual respect. Morwenna, her role in breaking the curse fulfilled, eventually retreated back into the deep forest, her presence a comforting whisper on the wind, a guardian spirit watching over the land she loved. But she remained a trusted advisor to Vesper and Reese, her wisdom sought out in times of need. The stone circle in the heart of the forest became a sacred place, a symbol of the new alliance, a place where humans and werewolves could meet, communicate, and celebrate their shared heritage. The full moon, once a symbol of confinement and fear, became a time of unity, of celebration, of connection. Vesper and Rhys, in time, were blessed with children, a daughter with her mother's dark hair and her father's golden eyes, and a son with his father's strength and his mother's gentle heart. They were children of two worlds, inheritors of a new legacy, a symbol of hope for a future where differences were celebrated, not feared, where love triumphed over hate, where balance reigned. One evening, many years after the breaking of the curse, Vesper and Rhys stood hand in hand at the edge of the moors, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange, pink, and gold. The wind whispered through the heather, carrying the scent of pine and the distant howl of a wolf, a sound that no longer chilled Vesper's heart, but filled it with a sense of belonging, of peace. Rhys, his hair now streaked with silver, his face lined with the wisdom of years, but his golden eyes still burning with that same fierce love, turned to Vesper, his hand tightening on hers. "We did it, Vesper," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We broke the chains." Vesper smiled, her own eyes, still the color of the deep sea, reflecting the beauty of the sunset, the love in her heart, the triumph of their journey. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but strong. "We did it together." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the moors, they stood together, silhouettes against the fading light, a testament to the power of love, the strength of unity, the enduring legacy of a bond that had broken the chains and forged a new destiny. The peace was hard-won, but it was theirs, and it was perfect. The end.